Good morning and welcome to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Today is Tuesday, September 23rd. I am Brittany Carper, joined this morning by Richard Cohen. Good to see you again, Richard.
Hi.
Thought we would kind of start from the jump here today. Some WNBA news that came out yesterday. I know they touched briefly on the pod about it with the Seattle Storm parting ways with Noelle Quinn. And then a little bit later in the day, both the front offices for the Chicago Sky and the Dallas Wings came out and said they will not be making any changes. So just a general takeaway from kind of obviously the Storm parting ways. I don't know that it was that surprising, even though they did make the playoffs, Richard. But just start there. And then if you want to kind of segue into the Wings and the Sky not making a change from there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was particularly surprised that Seattle decided to make a change, especially with Quinn's contract running out, which means it's not costing them extra money to pay off two coaches at the same time. I never felt like Quinn made Seattle better than the sum of their parts. It always felt to me like they were about as good as they ought to be at best from what was on the roster that she had in any given year. And given that, once you get a couple of years to try and see if you're gonna make the team better, there's not really much to hold on to the coach for unless you're starting to win something. There was no real sign of huge amount of progress. They obviously finished lower in the regular season this year than they would have expected with that group of players, even if some of that came down to luck in close games. Close games sometimes you put on the coach as well, because it's what they scheme in sort of those tight final possessions and what they come up with there. Sometimes you put that on the coach, so if you're losing those games, maybe that's on her as well. Yeah. Also, obviously, the controversy that came at various stages while Quinn was head coach, they cleared her of anything that Lloyd threw at her when she was there before getting traded. But the fact that so many things have come up in Seattle while she was there kind of helped the possibility of her keeping her job either, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, I think there was always a bit of controversy surrounding that franchise. You just hear kind of the whispers, the players, certainly had some things to say. So I don't think anyone was particularly surprised. I know they mentioned on the pod a couple names yesterday in Brianne January and Christy Tolliver as possible candidates for that job. Do you think with the success, obviously Carl Semesco had, and then, Lynn Roberts pushing the Sparks, to almost a playoff berth in her first season, do you think more franchises will continue to look towards the college game, or who do you kind of see as maybe a possible fit there?
I mean, franchises always tend to copy whatever's worked elsewhere. So the fact that it's gone so well with Semesco in Atlanta in particular, that I imagine they'll look. The problem in the past was always that sort of the top head coaches in college were getting paid too much and weren't going to want to come and work in the pros. I mean, someone like Semesco, like Williams coming to the pro game, maybe the money started to even out more and gotten closer, and maybe people are more interested now. Or we've got so many billionaire owners now coming into the WNBA. There are people willing to match those salaries, like they did to get Tibbetts in Phoenix. So yeah, they'll definitely look, but we've seen sort of assistants do fairly well as well. I imagine people like January and Tolliver. I was surprised January wasn't more in the mix in the last round of coaching over the previous round. We saw Nakase come in Golden State, for example, win Coach of the Year. She came off the assistant bench. But I do think having NBA experience, which Nakase had as well, has started to be one of the key things that a lot of franchises look for. So whether you've got that, Tolliver does. So that would add her to the list. Yeah, I think that's become part of one of the requirements that a lot of franchises are looking for in the new head coach.
Yeah, certainly that additional experience in the NBA side has been helpful, and you kind of see the crossover. And so much, I think, of the game has trended a little bit of the way that the NBA plays, or certain sets and systems that are ran. So, yeah, I think that will be factored in as well. And then the other news was that the Sky and the Wings are not making any changes after both first year head coaches. And I know, like we kind of said before we jumped on here, maybe a bit of controversy from a fan perspective, but certainly maybe time needed as well. What is your take?
Yeah, I think there'll be fans. I mean, we heard from them during the season that wanted either Kaklanis or Marsh gone, but teams often want to give you more than 1 year. Usually, you get two. It's usually the exceptions are the ones that get 1 year, and especially in Chicago, where Pagliocca already fired one coach after one season. It starts to look like a GM problem if you fire another coach after one season. So you want to give the second one a second year to try and not look like it was a mistake hiring them in the first place. So, and obviously, Kaklanis has got a long-term relationship with Kurt Miller in Dallas as well. So they've got trust built up from seasons before elsewhere. So yeah, it's not a big surprise to me that they're going to give them a second season, but it also wouldn't have been a huge shock if they'd got rid of either. In fact, basically, because just when you win that few games and finish that far down the standings, you take what you're given in the end.
Yeah, I think, like you said, could have probably gone either way, but certainly a second year I think will be helpful for both of those franchises. But with the CBA and attracting free agents, that's gonna be a bit of a question mark too, with how many are willing to go where there wasn't a lot of success in first year. So I think, that we'll see how that all plays out. But I think you have building blocks and Beckers and Reese at both of those franchises that I think maybe with another year and some additional pieces that can be built around. So that was kind of all on the WNBA side of the coaching carousel per se. But then yesterday also, Kara Lawson was named the USA head coach through 2028. And you said yesterday, this will be interesting. I'm not sure a lot of fans know, but the FIBA Cup plays, it runs through when the WNBA playoffs, if there is not, holdout or whatever happens with the CBA, but those two will conflict. So, when it comes to rosters or kind of what is your whole take on Lawson being named? And then, what do you see the USA team doing for a roster if that is a conflict with the WNBA season?
Yeah, it is. It's more complicated for the World Cup next year than it has been basically since the early 2000s, because they've moved the World Cup about 3 to 4 weeks earlier. So it's in early September rather than late September this time round, which means covering the usual footprint of a WNBA season. And the league hasn't committed to doing any particular thing yet in terms of what they're going to do to accommodate that. Whether you take a break, which would be a really weird and awkward time for the WNBA to take a break, because do you do it just before the playoffs? Do you try and move the schedule around? It would be awkward. Or do you try and fill a team with players who don't make the playoffs? Just name a sort of a 30-player squad and then pick the ones who are actually available afterwards. But the alternative, which may be part of why they hired Lawson as the head coach, would be taking college players, and you try and win the World Cup with Juju Watkins and Sarah Strong and anyone else you can get from the college ranks rather than the pros. That would be a risk because, as we've seen, those players might not be good enough to beat national teams. The pros were barely good enough to beat France in the Olympics last year. So, yeah, I mean, if the US wants to take more of a risk and potentially lose that long running record of winning all but one, well, it would now be all but two if they lost next year, but they're in the last 30 years now. So yeah, it would be a risk, but that might be part of why they hired Lawson, because she might be working with college kids next year. So you go for a college coach.
Yeah, and having the experience of the AmeriCup, obviously just finishing that off this past summer with a roster of all college kids. So I think having that experience, the knowledge of the game, the players that could help you maybe possibly win without pros. I think there certainly are a lot more questions than answers at this point, just because we don't know anything from the WNBA side in terms of scheduling or what that will look like. And so for her, to have, like you said, the knowledge of the college game to maybe put a roster together. I know she has a press conference today, I believe, 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern. I don't know what time that is over for you. But I think that will definitely, hopefully, give us some answers as kind of what she seems to be thinking in terms of a roster and what that will kind of look out. Do you want to touch any on who you think could, if it was all professional players, do you see some people that are sliding out from the past Olympic team? Or what is kind of your general takeaway on what that would look like if it was from the professional side?
I mean, I imagine it would be somewhat of a transitional period because the US tends to care a lot more about the Olympics than the World Cup. So the World Cup tends to be the transition to us to get to the next Olympics. So, and obviously the Tarasi era is finally over. So, but at the same time, if the pros are involved and if everyone is available via whatever mechanism they come up with, you'll take Asia Wilson, you'll take Nafisa Collier, your Brianna Stewart would still be involved, and your core would still be the same as long as they're all healthy and available to play. Yeah, I think ultimately it would be some new pieces. Caitlin Clark would probably be involved for the first time if she's healthy again, so that might add more eyes. But I think generally speaking, the squad would be who you would expect. It's the players we consider the superstars from the WNBA, as long as they're available to her.
Yeah, I think the biggest transition would be, like you said, at the guard spot a little bit, just because you do have some of the younger players in the league that are, quote unquote, becoming the next superstars, and but the core would still remain intact. But I'm looking forward to see what Kara Lawson, what she says in her press conference, and kind of the direction she sees going in the future for, obviously, upholding the very, very strong tradition of the USA national team. That will take us into tonight's games. We are in the second round. We have game twos tonight between Minnesota and Phoenix, and then Indiana at Las Vegas. And so, let's start with Minnesota and Phoenix. The game on Sunday was very good, very fast paced. Fun to watch. I think Phoenix kind of ran out of a little steam. They looked a little fatigued in the second half. But what do you think are the big focus points for both teams coming into tonight's game?
We were talking about it just before we started recording. I watched back a little bit because there was such a stark difference between the first and the second half. Alyssa Thomas was an offensive force in the first half, scored 16 points on 8 of 14 shooting, 8, I think, in the first half,
Mm-hmm.
and then only took 3 shots in the entire second half. So basically, Minnesota managed to turn her into a passer. But I also felt like Phoenix did a lot of the work for Minnesota. Like you were saying, they got tired, possibly mentally as much as physically.
Guys, I'm sorry to jump in here. I didn't want y'all to get too deep into previewing tonight before I told you. News just broke that the New York Liberty are not renewing the contract of
I
Sandy
did
Brondello.
wonder if that was coming.
Wow.
So if y'all
Okay.
wanted to touch on that real quick.
Yeah. Richard, I'm going to pause you real quick about our preview for tonight. Our lovely producer, B Mac, just hopped in and told us some breaking news on the coaching side of the WNBA, which we thought we were done talking about. But the New York Liberty have opted not to renew the contract of Cindy Brondello. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Richard?
I think it's a little bit of a surprise, but not a total shock. I mean, it's partly what we were just talking about with the schedule next year was going to be tough for her if she's head coach of the Opals. Would be very difficult to combine with a WNBA job when the World Cup's going to take place in the WNBA season. But also, I mean, obviously this season didn't go great, partly for things out of her control because of the injuries in New York. But yeah, maybe they thought it was time for a refresh, something new. they've obviously got a lot of strong personality players as well. I imagine they may have talked to people like Brianna Stewart, Jonquel Jones, whether they wanted Rondello to stick around or whether they felt it was time for a change as well. But yeah, I can't say I'm totally shocked, but yeah, given the success that Rondello has had both in New York and Phoenix, it is a little bit of a surprise that they would move on.
Yeah, the success part is a little bit surprising just because she has obviously won championships at both places. But I think you said it, they had injuries this year, but so did a lot of other teams in the league. And I don't think it just didn't look like the right buttons were pressed. And certainly, maybe that was just the collective pieces of what they had after missing players. But you saw it in the playoffs. It just they looked off, and I think sometimes that is a top down reflection. And I think as the coach, you are trying to do obviously what best with what you have, and it just seemed like certain things weren't being done in New York, and that's obviously a weird decision maybe because they did just win the championship, but like you said, maybe a time for a refresh with the new CBA. I think obviously attracting free agents and targeting some players maybe that with a new head coach they would fit a little bit better with what they think they would have coming back. So do you have any off the top of your head candidates there, or should we just wait and see how that one kind of plays out?
That one's a huge job in that, not that it's more difficult, but that it's going to be high profile. Working in New York, probably working with stars again, because I imagine they'll probably bring most of that core back if they can, and potentially add to it depending on how the structure of the CBA ends up being set up. But yeah, all sorts of people could be involved in that, because I would think sort of names from the men's side will start getting thrown in as well, and maybe bigger names from the college ranks than might be linked to somewhere like Seattle, because you've also got Joe Tsai's money to throw at whoever they might want to hire. So yeah, anybody could be involved there. Any big names, even big names from other WNBA club franchises, if they decide there's someone in particular they want that's interested. Like we saw when Indiana wanted Steph White, she basically worked her way out of Connecticut because she wanted to be back in Indiana. So that could happen.
Yeah, I think the thing about sports is just when you think nothing will surprise you, it surprises you. And that job is very high profile, especially being in New York and what they have as their core. So I think definitely the most coveted job that has opened, and I will be interested to see who fills that position. Back to the playoffs here.
Oh yeah, the
Uh,
basketball. Yeah.
the basketball side of it, we'll segue back into that. So, I kind of go back to what you were talking about in the Phoenix, Minnesota game, just how you were touching on the fatigue and maybe Minnesota not doing as much as what Phoenix had done to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, what it's what was working in the first half with Alyssa Thomas being incredibly aggressive offensively, looking for her own shot and her own production offensively, with a lot of those middle screens that were working all through the previous series as well against New York. It They went away from that in the second half. There were other players bringing the ball up. Thomas became a passer, became a hub, which she is a lot of the time for Phoenix, which she does work as. She's got talent around her with players like Copper and with Savali, but they went away from what had been working. And I think they'll watch the tape and think that one got away, and that Minnesota didn't necessarily figure things out that stopped them, but more that they went away from what was already working and that they can go back to it. And that I think they'll still have hope of winning game two and snatching one on the road anyway.
Yeah, the success for the Mercury runs through the ball in Alyssa Thomas's hands, and that was evident in the first round series against New York, in the first half against the Lynx on Sunday. And I think the one adjustment that I think Minnesota will do is they're going to continue to clog the paint, and they're going to, I think, dare the Mercury to beat them from the 3-point line. Sunday, the Mercury were 3 of 23. And now we talked about this several times this season. They kind of live and die by that. And so I think, will they have a better game tonight from the 3-point line? They certainly hope so. But I think if you're the Lynx, you're going to take your chances. You are going to clog the lane. You're going to challenge the pull up jumpers. And then what I thought was the biggest change too was just the misses in the second half allowed the Lynx to get out and run. And against tired legs of Phoenix, Courtney Williams looked like she just had another speed. She was so good with the ball. She could get it into the front court. I thought the ball moved a lot better. Kayla McBride made some big threes, Bridget Carlton. And so I think that to me was kind of the game changer. And now, Courtney Williams is kind of the master of the mid range, but she can also miss a lot of shots from there too. And so it will be interesting to see what Phoenix chooses to do on the defensive side for her, because I think this is the biggest thing that kind of is interesting with Phoenix to me, is that they like to have Sammy Witt come in from an offensive perspective, but you are giving up a lot on the defensive end when she replaces a Koa Makani. And so that now if a Koa Makani has a better offensive game, maybe she sees more playing time. But when Whitcomb is the only one who scores off the bench for the Mercury, that to me is the biggest decision there for Nate Tibbetts, is how do you manage that, or what do you see them changing if Whitcomb is in the game trying to guard Courtney Williams?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a choice between a veteran player who's had a good season for them in Whitcomb, but who clearly isn't the defender that McCarney is. They could obviously switch it up, move one of the other defenders across. You put the length of Copper on Williams and try and slow her down like that, because Bridget Carlton's not going to beat anyone off the dribble, or at least not very often, maybe once or twice a game. So you do kind of have a little bit of somewhere to hide somebody there if you needed to put Whitcomb on that side and try and rearrange the matchups while keeping her on the floor instead of McCarney. But yeah, I think generally speaking, you trust McCarney a little more. You have to let her play, and she's been a decent shooter at a lot of points this season. So you have to let her shoot. But I agree with you that the biggest change that Minnesota made in the second half wasn't what they were doing up on Thomas, where they've largely stayed the same, but more the help, that more people were coming across, more people were there in her face when she span around the screen or got an inch past Collier. There was someone waiting for her every time, and that turns her into a passer. And then Phoenix have just got to knock down shots on the perimeter. It's why you've seen Westbell coming in for Mac a lot, because Westbell can actually hit a three. If Natasha Mack takes threes, then the defense has won. So yeah, it's going to come down. I mean, we say it a lot. They say it even more in the NBA. It's a make or miss league. Sometimes you do just have to hit shots. And yeah, Kalia Copper missed a lot in the second half, and that was a big part of Minnesota's comeback in game one.
Definitely, and I think as you probably would agree, Satu Sabali has to be more effective for the Mercury for them to be successful. Similar game one that she had against game one in the Liberty in the first round, and so I expect her. She was 3 for 11, 0 for 5 from the 3-point line, and so definitely look for her to have a bounce back game, and then DeWanna Bonner to be a little bit more involved as well for the Mercury. I think that's going to be important off the bench. And I also wanted to note for the Lynx, though, Kliandakova was really good for the Lynx off the bench. I thought she gave them some extra possessions, finished around the rim, a little bit more size on the defensive end as well. And so excited to see kind of what that game two looks like, the adjustments. I said at the half on Sunday, the Lynx, arguably make the best adjustments in the league going into the second half.
Yeah.
And I think you saw that. And I know you think obviously the Mercury did a little bit to themselves, but they have proven throughout this season just their third quarter scoring. They make the right moves at the right time. And so definitely we'll be in for a treat of game two tonight. And then the second game that we have are, the Indiana Fever, who have been kind of the darling of these playoffs, the surprise first round winners over the Atlanta Dream, and then they go out to Las Vegas on Sunday and just kind of absolutely took it to the aces behind Kelsey Mitchell and the rest of that supporting cast that has done just a remarkable job this season. So, what do you think in game two is going to be important for both the Fever and the Aces, for either one of them to figure out a way to get the win?
Well, offensively, I think the main thing for Vegas is they need Asia Wilson not to miss 16 shots. Um, that's going to be the key element. Aaliyah Boston did really well, and with the help from the rest of the team as well, because obviously everyone coming into a game against Las Vegas knows who the primary person you have to worry about is going to be. But they did leave her in single coverage a lot with Boston, and everything was contested, everything was tight, and she missed. That's the best you can do is contest everything and hope she misses some, because she's going to take 15 shots at a minimum, more likely 20, 25 in a playoff game. So yeah, Vegas will work to get her into more space where they can, but ultimately we'll just trust that Wilson will come back to her regular mean and make more shots, and that'll give them better offense. Defensively, they probably have bigger concerns because they couldn't come up with anything against Kelsey Mitchell, and they're going to have to come up with a new plan because none of the previous ones worked. I think you have to lean more towards her and dare other people to beat you. Boston barely did anything offensively, so either she has to show up or the role players do. If you manage to throw more players at Mitchell and force her to give the ball up, so yeah, I think we'll see that in game two, and we'll see whether Indiana's other players can make the shots to then force them to lean back the other way.
Yeah, the aces to me, Asia Wilson just had an off night because when you look at the rest of the box score with their supporting cast, I mean, Jewel Lloyd didn't do a lot. I think for me, Melissa Smith needs to be a little bit bigger factor just in terms of the offensive end and honestly defensively. But to me, those two are kind of the keys for them. If they want to come out with a game to win, obviously you assume Asia goes back to being more efficient, not 6 of 22 from the floor. And then on the flip side of that, the Fever, like you said, I mean, the Aces have to find a way to slow down Kelsey Mitchell. I mean, there were way too many times she's coming off ball screens and just to the rim without any resistance. Certainly finding a way to either trap her, make her give the ball up. And like you said, other people on that team have to beat you. It wasn't like then, Aaliyah Boston went off or Lexi Hole made, all these shots. I think, Odyssey Sims obviously had a nice game for them as well, but you can't allow Kelsey Mitchell, to kind of do whatever she wanted. And that was the case on Sunday. She could get any shot she wanted. And the Fever played off of that, extremely well. But I think, that will be a really good game tonight as well. I think we've been, treated to a really good playoff series so far. I think the Fever are collectively riding that momentum of they've really rallied around the injuries. And I think, as you know, in sports, there's a lot to be said about that. It's kind of a rallying cry. And, what
Everything's against us. Yeah.
yeah, it's them against the world, and you're seeing that in the way they play. They just play so gritty. They're so tough. They never are out of it because you do have a player like Kelsey Mitchell. But Becky Hammond and the Aces, they have a lot of playoff experience, and so I think we are going to see some adjustments made on both sides of that matchup tonight as well. Any other thoughts on the game twos?
No, just to go back to that, I so much of what Vegas need to do is the team defense, because they're defending Mitchell differently from how Atlanta did in the previous series. In that everyone's going, mostly Jackie Young is going over the screens, chasing her around, which then that brings the second defender into play, because they're the one that has to corral her while the defender's coming around the screen. So it's all about the team defense that we've seen Minnesota show how you play team defense collectively and communicating and everyone helping each other out. There wasn't enough of that from Vegas. So it's about the collective more than sort of putting one player onto Mitchell and saying, you shut her down. Everyone has to lean and play connected, play together. And yeah, I think that's what we need to see in game two.
Yeah, I think you said it best. They just have to have a better effort defensively as a team. Everybody's got to kind of be moving on the same page to take away Kelsey Mitchell and then let, someone else from the Fever beat you. But with that, thanks for joining me today, Richard. Make sure you guys are listening, liking, subscribing to all the Her Who Stats content. And we look forward to recapping game 2 with you guys tomorrow.